of Mr. Yuryi Derevyanko, who is the expert of Andriy Zheleznyi, expert of National Ecological Center, will be talking about how the Kyoto money is being stolen in Ukraine. On the 12th at noon, Vladislav Zheleznyi, ATO spokesman, will brief us on how the peace plan of the president is being fulfilled, and at 1 p.m. we'll talk to experts and spokespersons from the State Committee of Broadcasting, Radio, Communications and Television. We'll talk about technical opportunities to prevent further transmission of propaganda via Russian TV in Luhansk and Donetsk.
In Crisis Media Center, we start every day. You can get the agenda at our reception. We are starting today with 11 a.m. The first speaker, Mr. Yuryi Derevyanko, Member of Parliament and expert of the National Ecological Center of Ukraine. We will talk half Kyoto money that Ukraine has received from unspent gas emission quotas, how they've been plundered in Ukraine, and what companies are involved in money laundering. Andriy will give you more details. Thanks.
Доброго дня, шановні.
Good morning, dear colleagues. The topic of today's conversation is the Kyoto money, the money that Ukraine is getting to promote energy efficiency and energy saving. As of today, Ukraine has got 70.4 billion hryvnia Ukraine of the Kyoto money. At the moment, we have almost 3 billion hryvnia. Part of it is the special fund of the state budget, and the rest is in Ukr-Eximbank in hard currency. And we're talking about the scheme of Yanukovych and Yanukovych's family that they have created in 2009 and 10 when they came to power, and the arrangement that they created even before is still working in Ukraine, regrettably. By the end of his rule, in December last year, Yanukovych and his team conducted a number of auctions for the 2.9 billion hryvnia, and we have a list of companies, from 7 to 9 companies, that got contracts. They have agreements to use this money. And we are talking here about Soddetel, almost 500 million hryvnia, Anti-Straight, 410 million hryvnia, Techbud Center, 286 million, 361 million for another company, and, well, there's a list of those companies. We understood that the regime of Yanukovych was built on the criminal scheme entirely, and today we're talking about the fact that we have to immediately stop this process because we have rather different people, totally different people in place whom we support in the parliament, but the medium and lower ranks are still manned by people who are intent on continuing those criminal arrangements. I would like to draw your attention on the fact that those are not just companies, not your average company, but according to the tax administration, these are the companies that have 0 main funds and 0 employed people. For instance, Life Building has 1 person in their staff and still has contracts for 361 million. Another company has 2 people employed, and they are filing for bankruptcy. Another company has not done anything last year. As a rule, they do not have anyone employed. They do not report financially, and the experts say that they are fictional companies that still possess state contracts for huge sums. And on the 7th of May, the Cabinet of Ministers agreed the use of money according to the program that the Ministry of Ecology sent to the government. So if we do not stop the process of these agreements and contracts right at the moment, then we will have a disaster when the cause of Yanukovych continues to live while Yanukovych is not here. In the nearest future, almost 875 million hryvnia have to be paid, and more than 645 million goes to Technobud Center and Life Building and other companies that are here on the list. This means that someone is interested in channeling this money to, namely, these companies. When we take another aspect, whether this money from the Kyoto Protocol is being used efficiently and why the money has not been used until today, it's almost 3 billion hryvnia. We also have to draw your attention and to pay attention to the fact that from the priority trends, from directions that the government has to channel this money to, is the repair of carriages in our underground system, metro, or the purchase of cars for the Ministry of Interior, which is 125 million hryvnia, while we understand that we're almost on the brink of the extraordinary situation in our energy emergency state. We have thousands of applications from schools and hospitals throughout Ukraine who need the insulation of their facades and the windows, that need those things that pertain to energy efficiency and energy use. However, in the first turn, they agree and finance the projects that have much less economic effect. You know, carriages, underground carriages, and cars for the Ministry of Interior. Of course, they have some explanations like electric engines and all this. But when we are talking about our social sphere, when we're talking about the requests from hundreds of schools who have filed all the projects for energy saving, who have got all the technical conclusions, that who have agreed all the projects, and those projects are stored for years in the energy agency, but instead we see that the money goes to these commercial entities, to projects that have no relation to energy efficiency. So we are asking, how do we prepare to the heating season, to the emergency state in our energy sector, if we do not solve all our arguments with Russia as far as gas is concerned? And 3 billion hryvnia is the money that will be sufficient to replace 1 million windows in our schools and to save a colossal amount of money that otherwise will be used for heating of our educational establishments. Why the money is not being channeled here? Because the system was absolutely non-transparent. And this means that not a single bidder for this money did not understand how the contest is being held, what are the criteria for assessment. So in this fog, the projects that were beneficial to only some people were dragged through the agreement process. So my colleague, who is a public activist and coordinates public activity on this, will talk to us about the public control. We understand that we have to change the system of control to have the money to channeled to really important projects. We have to change the system of management, of transparency, and of use of this money so that the public gets the maximum possible effect. I addressed the Prime Minister, the Prosecutor General's office, and the Ministry for Incomes and Excise and for Ministry of Ecology so that they pay attention to this immediately, stop this process, and cancel all the agreements and contracts that were done just in order to pass on these decisions, stop spending this money, and change the thing for absolutely transparent process. This is 3 billion hryvnia. I want a representative of the public to express his opinion about the control of public and how, to what extent the public can be involved into all those procedures, how transparent they are, and how we can control the money that is public money.
Good afternoon. The money received by Ukraine according to Kyoto Protocol, this is money that came to the budget just for air. We received this quota because the production in our country decreased. I would like to emphasize that this is the target funds because they are to be used for the projects directed towards decreasing the amount of pollution in Ukraine. And so the scheme that was developed to channel the money for different projects was developed. We were the first ones who demanded to return the money back. There was a resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers 221, which was about the procedure, which was absolutely non-transparent. We were trying to apply the transparent scheme in 2014. We traveled to several dozens of facilities to understand what is the situation with the projects on which almost half of this money was spent. In the result of such public audit, we prepared the report where we give the facts showing that in many cases the projects were not implemented or they were implemented with violation of construction norms or the technology of making the buildings insulated. It was non-efficient use of money, basically. Why did this happen? Because we were sending requests. We wanted to give the list of the facilities to which the money was spent was basically hidden. There were approximately 900 projects in 2011. In 2012, this list was just 500 facilities. It was reduced twice, and we were trying to get an explanation why this happened. But in 2013, when mass media started publishing some investigations of the journalists, the list of these projects was changing all the time. And today we have about 800 facilities to which the government has to spend about 4 billion hryvnias. The state agency states that 200 projects have been implemented already, but the technical audits are not disclosed. According to the agreement, international agreement with Japan, there should be the technical audit made after the project is implemented. And this audit should show to what extent the amount of discharge is decreased. But these documents are classified, are made classified, and the agency tells us that that is confidential information, that we cannot know what are the results of these audits, and that means that we will either have to go again to all these facilities or we will have to make these documents, these audits public. I believe that the information which is hidden is very important, and it is not beneficial for someone to make it public. If the money is spent transparently, then there will be no opportunities for corruption schemes. And that is why we also addressed the Minister of Environmental Protection and to stop all these corruption schemes, and he promised that his task in the ministry is to get rid of these schemes, but we see that 100 days of the activity of the government are over, but the schemes are still working. That means that same people who organize such schemes are still holding same positions. The public organizations, NGOs, suggest to improve the efficiency of introducing the scheme of use of Western investments. We suggested some recommendations. Some of them are of anti-corruption nature, to cancel old agreements and to organize new tenders according to new tender legislation. Also, to those people who violated the law, which allowed the companies which cannot execute their commitments to get money. Also, we insist on this Resolution 221, which is about making public the information about the facilities, to make the list of the facilities public. Also, there should be the cost estimate of all the projects made public, and also the information that the applicants submitted for tender. We suggested our draft amendments to the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers 221, and we hope that the government will accept them, because we hope that they will help improve efficiency of use of money. These are not those which will change the system drastically, but they just strengthen the responsibility. The mechanisms of implementation, they have all the items that we want to put into this resolution. Also, we believe that the General Prosecutor's Office should investigate all the abuse and violations, and the members of parliament, we believe, could be could push the General Prosecutor's Office towards investigating all these criminal actions. And probably besides the public control, probably what is needed is to have the control in the parliament via some provisional investigation commission. Any questions?
The International Department of the Central Council of the companies, hundreds of Maidan. My question is to Mr. Yuryi, who is one of the brave and honest MPs. My question, the question as if does not relate to today's topic, but there are similar roots, if not common roots. As is known, after Mr. Yanukovych fled the country, the Academic Council of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense, independently of each other, have arrived to the conclusion that there's a possibility of the annexation of Crimea by Russian forces, but no one from the leadership of the country reacted to this. Can you tell us why they did not react and who is to blame? Well, you know, we all have seen day by day how legally Yanukovych was losing his authority, as we saw how there was voting for the restoration of the constitution, how there were appointments of acting heads of departments and ministries, and how in parallel the process of annexation of Crimea was developing. Of course, we now can tell that this was a planned action and that it was being effected when our authorities were in the stage of formation, and those people were just starting to take part in the leadership of the country because, of course, there were some objective factors that those people of authority who have just started to perform their duties could not embrace everything. Maybe we will know something with the flow of time, but I try to answer with time we will be able to answer the question whether the authorities have done everything. I am bitter that the former brotherly nation went to war with the Ukrainians. I am very bitter that the leader of their state decided to go to war against Ukraine. I am aggrieved that we were not able to preserve this part of our territory, but I am convinced that this is temporary. I am convinced that if all the branches of power will work in a synchronized manner, then we won't allow similar things to happen in the future. And what we are talking now today is also has bearing on our security, because this is the energy security. And we have everything. We have new civil servicemen, we have money, we only have to apply some will in order to efficiently use these resources. When we're talking about whether we are satisfied with how it's happening, my answer is no, we're not satisfied, and that's why we went to talk to you to correct those things in time and not to allow the disaster to happen, because we may witness the failure to provide heating for our communal institutions, cultural and educational institutions, or we will be forced to use unbelievable amount of money. And all these are parts of one chain, including the untimely actions or possibly untimely actions as far as Crimea is concerned and Donbass now, and what has to be done swiftly in the energy sphere that we're talking about. Any other questions pertaining to the could you tell us whether at the moment there are public or state methods of monitoring the expenditure and spending of this money? I understand that you've got your data from some channels as an MP, but is there a channel that the public can do this? I am head of the subcommittee on the fighting corruption in the bodies of state power and local self-government, and if you and we have an open way to monitor all the procedures that are taking place, I'm sure that we won't be in the horrible state that we are now. First, the General Prosecutor's Office has to cancel all those contracts through legal means, through courts. We have to stop the payments that are planned. We have to launch criminal proceedings on the abuse of power against all officials that were taking part or are taking part in this scheme. We, at the level of the government, have to cancel all the agreements because they might have done this in the belief that all the previous things were done according to the law, and we have to pass the law that I will submit very soon that will provide for this money to be channeled exclusively for the measures connected to energy efficiency in social institutions like kindergartens and schools, ambulances and hospitals. Besides, this draft law provides for us to get the information on the actual state of all the projects going to be submitted for consideration, to get the subcontractors and all this. If we in online or at least twice a month can get the information, then we will be able to publicly control it. When we're talking about decentralization, this means that we have a unique chance to now demonstrate a possibility to decentralize, taken as an example the Kyoto money. This does not have to be a single state enterprise subordinated to the Ministry of Ecology that will dictate who and how will get the money. At the very competitive market, this means that according to requests, the money has to go to different parts of Ukraine, and bodies of local self-government and local councillors should be involved, who will take care about the kids going to schools and sitting in warm classes, where they will, in the most efficient way, use the money, because there's going to be a very tight public control. So I suggest that the government and the parliament support this draft law and not waiting for the great changes in the constitution, demonstrate that we can do something. And the last point, today we have an opportunity to conduct lustration in every ministry who were taking part in all those criminal schemes. And real people stand behind those documents and contracts, and nothing precludes any ministry now from reorganizing any department or general department and to launch internal lustration before we pass the law on lustration. So these are the immediate steps that should be undertaken now. Then we will have transparency, control, and the situation when any official won't like to touch the money to embezzle it.
That measures that could be taken very quickly now, such as publishing the audit you mentioned and simply freezing all the current contracts, have not been taken. Why do you think this is? Is this simply because the new government is still getting itself organized, or is it because it actually lacks the political will to do it?
Я перекладу. Чому оці два кроки, які вони
This is the translation of your question. I wouldn't like to think that the government has something to do with these schemes. I would like to think that these are some remains of the old system which hasn't been cleaned up yet. And they, this way, are acting. And the fact that they gave to the government the approval of this program, because the government had a high credit of trust to the civil servants. They probably did not look at that. Are you talking about this program on 3 billion, which is approved? Yes. It has been approved for 2.9 billion hryvnias. That's the money already allocated to these companies. That is what the program from the 7th of May 2014, which has been approved for 2014-2015, and what was approved by the State Agency on Environment was approved by the government. That was done. After that, the government approved another program for smaller amount of money. After that, no one reacted, and the ministry did not cancel that program. There is a desire to get this money. So I believe that we need to stop that immediately. But talking about who is to be blamed, that is up to the General Prosecutor's Office to find out. The Ministry of Duties and Fees, they reacted to that, and they informed the Ministry of Finance that these companies have the signs of being fictitious. So the Prime Minister does know that, right? I believe he does know that, because the Ministry of Finance has that. The government on the 6th of May, the ministry approved that, and then the government approved that on the 7th of May, so they know. I have no doubts that the government will be fighting that. I'm sure that the government will be making some specific steps in this direction, but this shouldn't look like the plan of actions which was approved by the government, so that it doesn't look like, if there is a plan of actions approved by the government, it has to be implemented. I don't want some so-called businessmen basically make use of such situations. Basically, they managed to get debts already. These companies which do not have people working in the companies, they already have debts of 400 plus hryvnias. So how have they accumulated the debts? This should be investigated. But if we want to show that these are new people, new system, and new rules, then we need to stop such things, to investigate these things and show publicly who is to be blamed. So I would like this illustration to take place in these ministries, so that we know who from all the team of Yanukovych was manipulating these things. And I would like the new government to approve transparent rules, so that no one in the future can behave like these companies, so that there are no even minimum chances to steal money. And if the government cancels the program, how quickly the situation will be resolved? Will bureaucratic procedures make it possible for such companies to use the money? If the government decides not to finance these projects, then this will be done within a single minute, and the law enforcement bodies will react, and the companies will not get a single copy of this money. And we need to start very quickly the procedure of open tenders for all the projects, so that this money is not frozen, because Japan is the party which was assigning the quotas. They were surprised why for so long the funds haven't been used. Some of these funds are in Ukreksim Bank, and the bank probably finances some other projects using this money. But you understand that this money was received not in the last 2-3 months, but in the previous year, and the sum impresses almost 3 billion. Basically, the money is not used when we have this right period of time, this summertime, when we can get ready to all these challenges related with the heating season. So there should be actions made. On the one hand, we need to stop and don't finance. On the other hand, we need to act transparently. 3 billion hryvnia, that strengthens any activity of small and medium-sized business which is ready to do this work, and the objectives are great, but this should be done under the control of the society, of the public, via decentralization. And I would like to add to this, so talking about transparency and how to control, now the local communities, they are not involved into how this money is used. They don't have any mechanism of control of how the projects are implemented. When I was traveling to the regions, I talked to the heads of these facilities, and they are disappointed because of that scheme. And they were off records. They were saying that they were they are sorry that they participate in this program. They believe that they would be able to get such money outside of this program. And very often the buildings where the projects of insulation are not made, are made of not the best quality, they practically have to sign very often the documents that everything was done in their buildings, despite the fact that other materials are used than it was stated in the design documentation, because the design documentation is a top secret for the public, but also for the managers of construction sites. Very often the managers do not know what should be done in their buildings. And I would like to say that that is partially the political will as well, because what was hidden and what is considered to be top secret was done so with the approval of the Cabinet of Ministers. If the government is ready to disclose that, it will be welcomed by the public, and basically the recommendations could be provided. Also, these audit reports, they have information about the problems in the projects, and that basically could be the reason to compensate losses for the state. Every father, every mother is interested in having their child to go to the school where it is warm. And the same way, the regional, the village, local authorities, they are trying to find some money to replace windows, for example, old windows. And different regions are in different climate schools. And these windows have different requirements. And when within such a program they install bad quality windows, then people cannot throw away these windows. They cannot get any other money from the local budget because the windows have been installed already. And that's the tragedy for schools. And that is because there's no proper control locally. And that is what we are talking about. We want this money to be used efficiently. At the same time, if the village council or the regional council controls this money, then the windows will be of high quality, and they will examine carefully all the technical specifications, and the community will know that the money is used and is spent efficiently, and that will be real energy efficiency. So please introduce yourself. Alexander, radio voice of the capital. Most of these schemes, they were basically approved at the level of the tenders. But briefly, what do you know about the owners of these several companies that you mentioned? And maybe it's easy for you to follow the who approved that at the Cabinet of Ministers, who initiated this approval that later the government approved. I would like to answer the first part of your question. Whose companies these are? According to my data, to my information, they started using this money in 2012, but the first projects were made in 2011 to show the Japanese that the project has started. And these projects were implemented in Crimea, but they violated the state construction norms. They were using some material for walls, which was actually wrong material, and now the project suffers because parts of the walls are just falling apart. The holes were basically, there were holes in Crimea. That was in Crimea. Now that is the occupied territory. Besides, I realized that just like other journalists, that without the approval of the government, the scheme could not exist, because approval was at all the levels, at the level of the Agency on Ecology, Cabinet of Ministers, Ministry of Finance, and the journalist investigation conducted in the end of 2012 found out that minimum 3-4 of these companies were owned by the member of parliament Ivanющenko. So you can imagine that owners of these companies are such people. The whole package of the documents was prepared by the state company Derevyanko Invest, and they were then submitting these documents to the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Finance, then to the government, and they were approved by the government. So talking about the mechanism of approval of these documents, also it's important to say that the former ministers of the times of Yanukovych, they had their own people, and these people somehow they are still holding some positions in the ministry and in Derevyanko Invest, in this agency which was supporting the whole process. I do not exclude that these are the people who organize these schemes. These people sign these documents, and I understand that maybe the minister did not know, the minister does not want to support the idea, but there are people who sign such documents. I believe that the General Prosecutor's Office, the law enforcement bodies will get acquainted with authors of these signatures, and they will find the connection with these people who were basically manipulating and who are in the government. The State Investment Agency, which is preparing the action plan on use of the money, who's heading this State Environmental Agency. Me, as an expert who, this is the person from Lviv, Margolich, Mr. Margolich, in the Mr. Mokhnik in the Ministry of Environment, and you can see the information on how these people were elected. That is absolutely new person, but those people who received the documents, who used to work in the agency, who were approving these documents. They still work in the agency. They knew about that scheme. Some of them went up in the career. And I'm sure that the same situation is in the ministry. Those people who were involved into implementation at the level of the heads of departments, they are still there, and they know all the information about what was happening before and what is happening now. But the classical scheme is usually the deputies sign, and I would suggest to the General Prosecutor's Office, besides looking at this, generally look attentively at those people who were signing the documents, because they are part of the team who was trying and who was doing it in the past, and who's trying to continue that. There is a systemic mistake. We have over-centralization. If we correct that mistake, then we will have the opportunity to have decentralized money. There will be the control of more people over this money, and we will have less briefings like this one, but we will have more positive from such projects. I believe that is a key systemic mistake which is to be basically corrected. They have to not to be responsible for the selection of participants, to select the executors of works. If we decentralize that, we'll have a better result. But there's no mechanism of decentralization. We will suggest this mechanism to the Prime Minister and to the Verkhovna Rada, to the Parliament, so that it's approved. From the point of view of how to use the money and how to better organize the system of decision-making, will this be part of the draft law? When we are talking about the requirements of openness as well, practical steps are within the competence of the bylaws of the Cabinet of Ministers. Then the last question, do you believe that this draft law and the mechanism will find support by members of parliament? I have no doubts in that, because when everything is happening publicly, openly, I want to see people who will say that they do not support it. I have no doubts this will be supported. It's important for us to draft it.
Will it be your committee? If the MPs from our friendly factions can join me, that I'll be happy to accept them. I don't have any fight for the authorship here. The more MPs join us, the more the probability of accepting this. Thank you, Mr. Yuryi and Andriy, for this exhaustive information, and the main thing for the active plan of actions for the steps that we have to make now to preclude the embezzlement of money. And our next speaker is going to be here.